Hey guys, Ken Smith Fishing. This is going to be part one of a two-part series where we're going to look at forward imaging sonar. And what we're going to look at is the Garmin Livescope versus the Lowrance Active Target. Now, if I accidentally call the Lowrance Active, Live Sight in this, please forgive me. That's their old technology. Their new technology is Active Target. So I had been looking at videos trying to decipher the difference. I've had the chance now to spend a little bit of time with the ballistic, and then again recently in another boat with the Lowrance Active Target, and I could not see a significant difference. And then so I watched a bunch of videos online about it, and I again could not see a lot of significant difference. One of them, for example, the guy was looking at a bridge piling, and he said, I can see it at 90 feet versus 95 feet here. And it seemed really, really subjective, and there could be a ton of different variables mixed into that. And guys, I'm agnostic. I don't care. As you guys know, I work with Jones Trolling Motor, and I do that specifically so that I can have any product versus being sponsored by a product, which I'm not. So on my next boat, I can already tell you what's going to be there. It's going to be at the dash. There's going to be a Humminbird for the map. There's going to be a Garmin for down imaging and side imaging. On the front deck, there's going to be a Garmin for Livescope, and there's going to be a Humminbird for 360 and mapping. So if Lowrance had if I personally felt Lowrance had a better option for any of those applications, I would have a Lowrance on my boat. But right now, I don't see that as the case. If they do in the future, I will. But I'm agnostic. I don't care. But everything I saw online was so subjective, I wanted to make a little more technical comparison. And so I kind of started digging into the specs on the Livescope and on the Active Target. And the one seemingly significant difference that I could find was in cone angle. And I'll talk more about that specifically, but before we do that, let's actually talk about what cone angle is. And by the way, you're going to see this is a little bit choppy. You're going to see me in a couple different shirts or wardrobe changes, different levels of shaved and hair. Normally I get one of these videos done in 3 or 4 hours. This one's been a couple of weeks now, so I've spent a bunch of time on these two videos. And what happened is we built the videos, and then we discovered more things we wanted to explore. So we went down rabbit holes, and you're going to benefit kind of all of that research that we've done by watching these two videos. So let's level set right here with the video I shot several days ago talking about what a cone is in relationship to a sonar unit. So traditionally, as you see here on the page, 2D sonar shot a round cone to the bottom. And if you've never watched it, Doug, the guy who does and I can't say his last name, Varenberg, who does the Humminbird videos, does a great job with some flashlights and talking about this from several years ago, and I learned so much watching those videos. But cone angles are set by the kilohertz, or the kilohertz generally will tell you what the cone angle is. So you see, for example, on this slide, this is something I cut off the internet somewhere, showing a 200 kilohertz shooting a 20-degree cone, a 83 kilohertz shooting a 60-degree cone, and then out to the side, and we'll talk more about that, but the side imaging shooting a different style of cone. And you can find online a bunch of these spreadsheets that guys have built that tell you the difference in those cones. And it's important to understand that. And by the way, you can even see how a fish appears on a 2D sonar. You can tell where they are by their colors and some other things if you learn to do that, which I did early on using 2D sonar. But you could see here, for example, on a 20-degree cone angle, which would be the 200 kilohertz, 30 feet down, the diameter, so the cross section, if you will, across the circle would be 10.6 feet. So you'd be seeing 10.6 feet at 30 feet down. And generally speaking, you'll hear this formula on a 20-degree cone. The bottom, the diameter, if you will, of that cone is 1/3 of the depth. So, and you see it here, 10 feet, it's 3.5 feet, 20 feet, it's roughly 7 feet, 30 feet, it's about 10 feet. So, and that's basically, by the way, you'll see here the 2D image doesn't show well, but that circle at 20 feet is about 7.1 feet, you know, any way you measure it across the middle of that in a 20-foot spot. And then if you're shooting it in a 60-degree cone with 83 kilohertz, it's a much, much bigger one. And there's a whole big long rabbit hole to go down on the chirp where they're shooting it in multiples. And it's interesting, but we're not, for our purposes today, it doesn't really matter. So that's basic cone angles to kind of level set for everybody. And again, traditional 2D sonar shoots a round cone. But if you do a little bit of research, what you'll find is down imaging actually shoots elongated ovals, as I'm showing you right here in this picture. And by the way, side imaging shoots a very similar style of cone for you when it shoots out to the side. So down imagings are just basically elongated ovals. And interestingly, so also are forward imaging. They're elongated ovals. All right, so let's dive in. So maybe one of the most difficult things I have ever experienced. So I wanted to know the cone angle differences. And it's really easy to find the Garmin cone angle. It's right here on this page. This is off the Garmin website, and you see the beam width on their forward imaging transducer is 20 degrees by 135 degrees. And we'll talk about what that means in just a second. The Lowrance, however, is nowhere on Lowrance's website. I called Lowrance, and I promise you, I got bounced around the globe trying to find somebody who knew what this was. I emailed Lowrance 3 weeks ago, no response. And you know, let's talk about that. So whether you like Garmin or whether you like Lowrance better, I would caution you, you can't talk to a human being who knows anything, or at least that's my experience so far with Lowrance. Their customer service is not as good, in my opinion, as what I have seen out of Garmin or Humminbird, either one. Now, maybe they fixed that, but I would suggest to you, before you go spend $4,000 on a unit, make a couple of phone calls to their customer service lines and see what your impressions are on them. That's just mine, and that's why, as I went through this, technically, you'll see, well, we'll talk about my findings, but my findings were, I would rather deal with the folks at Garmin right now than I would with the folks at Lowrance. So this is the only way, and I actually TextMan, who I'll talk about here in a minute, helped me find this. The only place we could find the cone angle on the Lowrance, and by the way, if you Google that, the first thing that pops up is a 40 degree, on Google, the first thing that pops up is a 40 degree cone angle, but if you look at that article, it's from several years ago. So there's no good current data out about this. We found this, so we found the one on the right here first, and you see the price down there, $2,300. The reason you see that price being where it is, this is from a reseller in Australia is where we found this. And then we found one, and I cut the price off, but it's about $1,000 on the one on the left. We finally, as Reagan said, trust but verify. We finally found it on a U.S. reseller as well. So I feel comfortable after finding it on 2 different websites. These are the only 2 websites that we could find, resellers or Lowrance or anybody that quoted what this cone angle is. And it's, we believe pretty confidently, it's 18 by 135 degrees. So let's talk about, we had already talked about the, oh, you know what? So I found this online, and I thought there's just something missing in this picture. So here's what's missing, right? You don't want that white thing on there. You want a big Mercury 300R hanging off the back of that boat. So, so this is, again, that elongated oval shooting forward, and I thought this was a nice graphic. But what we really want to understand is, what's that diameter across the fattest part of that elongated oval? How much information am I either able to gather with either that Lowrance or that Garmin? And we already had looked. We found these charts all over the place, and it was very easy because a lot of cones, well, 20 degree is a very common cone angle on most of our units that we've historically used, but I couldn't find 18 degrees. So I started playing with the math, and every time I thought I got the math right, I would back check my own math, and I became concerned I wasn't getting the math right. So I have so I turned to an engineer, right? So I have a viewer who I've become friends with, and I'm not going to say his name because I didn't ask him permission, but you'll see he comments a lot on my technical videos. He's TextMan201. And I said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. And I actually feel way better. This guy's uber smart. He is a retired engineer with some pretty impressive professional background. I felt better because even after he did what he did for me, he came back a week later and said, hold on, I'm questioning my own math, and he rechecked his own math. And this is what he provided to me. And I know this is a lot of information. I'll narrow it down for you in a second. But this is range from 5 out to 100 feet of the widest part of that elongated cone. And then he gave it to us again. He broke it down and make it simpler in 10-foot increments. So most of us don't look, well, I think most of us are shortening up how far we look forward with our forward imaging. Now, the young man, the Japanese fellow who won Rayburn, I guess that would have been the Open last year, he was out at 90 to 100 feet, but I think that's pretty unusual. I think most guys are in the 40 to 60 foot range when they're using their forward imaging. And what surprised me is, a little bit I guess, it's really not that big a difference. It's about 2 feet at 50 feet, the difference in that cone angle. And as I did this, I was looking for an aha. I was looking for an aha, this one's better or that one's better. What I can tell you is, if you think about it, it makes sense. The tighter the cone, the harder it is to line up on something, okay? So the wider the cone, the easier it is to line up on something, or find something, how about that, not line up. But the narrower the cone, the sharper the picture. But what I would submit to you is this, let me do some quick math. No matter the distance, it's about 10% more you can see with the Garmin, 10% less you can see with the Lowrance, which is almost negligible. It's almost as if Lowrance did this to say we have a sharper picture, or we're not exactly copying the Garmin software. Now, there's a huge backstory on this. If you don't know the backstory, you can go research it. Lowrance, my understanding is Lowrance originally developed this. Well, I'm not even going to get into this, but there's been a lawsuit between these two companies that's pretty well public knowledge. And they've settled it, and they both now have extremely similar technologies. The transducers look alike. They're the same size. If you check they're so similar, it's unbelievable. This is the only thing I could find any significant difference in. And so my belief is if there's a 10% difference, variance, if you will, in what you can see, I might give Lowrance a 10% better clarity, if you will, which again, to me, is almost insignificant. Do you want to see more stuff, or 10% more stuff, or do you want to see stuff 10% more clear? I personally think, as I've looked at several of these units now, I've had a chance to look at several of them, as much of it as anything is about the unit you're viewing the data on as about the actual forward imaging transducer. The more you spend on those, the clearer they are. I think that's where you really see the difference in these two units. And trust me, I have buddies who say hands down the Lowrance is clearer, and I have buddies who say hands down the Garmin is clearer. And I got a lot of buddies saying I like my Mega Hummingbird, and I want to see what Hummingbird's answer to this is before they buy it. But if you're waiting on that, in the meantime, you're fishing at a disadvantage. So I don't, as I looked at this data, I don't think there's that big a difference. I just don't see that there's that big a difference. Now, the other thing, so that's that forward imaging, right? But they also have a 135-degree cone on the linear axis, I guess is the way to say that, and I'm sure somebody will correct me on that. You know what, guys, that seems like a good place to take a break. I'm going to make this 2 parts because I've got about this much footage again for part 2. So what we're talking about, we've been talking about the cone angle shooting this way. Now we're going to flip it on the perspective mode and talk about some things that you may not have considered about. Well, and a lot of guys have asked me, do I use the perspective mode much? When does it work? When does it not work? So I'm going to share with you my experiences on that, my thoughts about that, what I'm going to do on future boats, etc. So let's break here. We'll come back with part 2, and we'll talk about perspective mode, which is what Garmin calls it, and it's called scout mode in the Lowrance. And yes, you have to do some things manually to change that, and I'll talk more about that in part 2 of this video. So stay tuned. We'll have that next part up real quick here.